McCuistion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Well, hi, I'm Dennis McCuistion, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Jim Falk. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Good to see you. We're still in our virtual environment.
We certainly are, and I'm going to ask you to introduce our guests in just a minute. But first, let me tell that viewer what we're going to talk about on this program. We're going to look at the police issue in America a little differently from what you see on the nightly news, where people are yelling at each other or else defending the police or else trying to hurt people. We're going to talk about the challenges that the police themselves are facing, so you'll have some insights into that. We're going to talk about the concept of qualified immunity, what that means and whether it's a good idea, not a good idea. We're going to talk about racial profiling. We have a guest who's an expert on that issue of racial profiling. And we'll talk about sort of the training that police officers get, which we hope will lead to, let's just say, less animosity in the future. And then finally, we may talk a bit about the violence against police officers as well. So, Jim, why don't you introduce our guests and let's get started.
For over 2 decades, Alex Del Carmen has been training chiefs of police on racial profiling. As Associate Dean and Professor at the School of Criminology at Tarleton State, he has devoted much of his career to bridging the gap between academia and law enforcement professionals. We also wanted to get feedback from a police professional in the actual trenches. So we went to Irving, Texas, where we met with the Chief of Police, Jeff Spivey. B.J. Wagner is Executive Director of the Caruth Police Institute. She started her career as a county jailer. She later became a law enforcement officer, where she saw firsthand the need to direct more attention to mental health. This led to her pursuing training in counseling psychology at Texas A&M University. Today, BJ is a highly regarded consultant to police departments, particularly on techniques of de-escalation. BJ, let's turn to you first. Given the events of the last several months, how are the rank and file holding up?
On any average day, policing is vicarious. People who are working as first responders across the country and certainly here across Texas experience on an average of 188 critical incidents across the course of their career. Now, when I say critical incidents, I want you to think of your worst day and the worst thing you've ever seen, and then multiply that times 10 and imagine experiencing that 188 times over 25-year lifespan. That's what we ask our first responders to do on an average year of policing. It is, of course, by far a delicate balancing act because we are hiring humans. We hire people who experience life day to day, just as you and I do. And then we put them in this tinderbox of experiences and expect perfection. And so as we look across policing now, we see that they have not only experienced a period of civil unrest, but prior to that, they were experiencing the COVID pandemic in a way that you and I have not had to experience the COVID pandemic.
Alex, you spend your life obviously training particularly police chiefs, I think you said. One of the things that I think occurs to that viewer is that this issue of police violence or these conflicts that we seem to have don't seem to be going down in spite of all the publicity, but in some ways seem to be going up. Maybe it's because of the glare of the spotlight more, I'm not sure. But tell us what you're doing, what you're teaching, and what you expect them to do, and what they expect their own officers to do based on the training that they do get.
Well, one of the things that we see across the United States right now, and in Texas in particular, is, as BJ noted, a great deal of stressors that are actually affecting the profession in a way that historically they never have. Being in law enforcement is not an easy task, and being a police officer is not easy. We've known that for years, ever since the inception of law enforcement, by the British government. We've studied law enforcement. We studied the stressors that affect them. Anyone that goes into that profession is an individual that is following really a path related to a vocation more so than a career. So putting that in context and then adding to that the recent stressors that are in place, they're really feeling it. We are seeing right now across the state of Texas and across the United States a phenomenon that we've never seen before as long as our country has been formed, which is that people are leaving law enforcement by the masses. I mean, you're looking at Dallas-Fort Worth area alone, and we're looking for a chief of police in Dallas, in Fort Worth, and in Arlington at the same time. In the 22 years that I've been here, that's never happened before. And so you add to that the fact that, they're feeling that they're not being appreciated. A lot of chiefs of police are telling me on the ground that their stressors are immense, because not only is the public or some members of the public voicing their concerns against them, but also you have the litigation component that is coming forth where they're getting inspired to file lawsuits left and right. So what we are telling them is that this is a historical moment. We are telling them that this is history in the making. And this is that we are here at this time because we've been chosen to do that in the context of facing reality in a way we've never faced it before. But the Republic, the Constitution, and law enforcement have to survive this. And not only survive it, but also use it as an opportunity to excel, as an opportunity to adapt to those new challenges that are coming forth and becoming better police departments and better members of our society. But I will add to that the fact that I believe that it is equally important for community members to be instructed as to the realities of what law enforcement is and what exactly the profession does. Because there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what police officers do on a daily basis, most of which have been created or formed through social media or movies or various other sources that are not factual. So at the end of the day, what we are looking for is for these two entities, law enforcement and the community, to come together, to bridge that gap, and to begin an honest, direct dialogue.
Dr. Del Carmen, what do you think are the three most important points that our citizens should know about the police? What are the misunderstandings?
Well, the first point, I think, and the most critical, perhaps, Jim, is the fact that law enforcement come from the community. They are part of the community, and they will return to the community after they finish their professional endeavors, right? So people oftentimes see it as them versus us, but in reality, many members of the law enforcement community, and really all of them in practical terms, are part of the community. Secondly, they actually work for the community. As I remind police officers, and I've trained over 15,000 of them in the course of 22 years, and I can tell you that I tell them day in and day out, when y'all receive your check, who is the check signed by? And the answer to that is a city manager or a mayor or somebody to that effect, meaning a civilian raised the pen and signed the check that is paying, compensating that officer for the work that's been done. So the bottom line is that the Constitution does apply in the sense that they are serving the public. And thirdly, the other part that I think the community needs to understand is that their job is incredibly complex. Most people think that police officers, is all the actions that you see on various shows on TV or Hollywood. I call it 100 hours of boredom, 1 second of terror.
First and foremost is what we are doing in policing to adapt to the new expectations of our communities is this idea of racial injustice, the idea of the civil unrest that's happening and what police departments are doing to make amends for our past and set us up for success in the future. And you see police chiefs across the country working really hard to make sure our policies are in place, make sure that our training is where it needs to be, and establishing cultures within our organizations that recognize where policing came from, that recognize what the expectations of our communities are today, and that hopefully put us on a path forward for the future where we can continue to deliver police service, but do so in a manner that is fair and just to everyone, that is impartial, and that leaves people with an idea that they've been treated fairly, that they can trust their local police department, and that we're still able to provide public safety and security. When we hire police officers, we ask them a question: why do you want to be a police officer? the standard answer, and it's become kind of a joke in the policing profession, is because I want to help people. And we have to remind them of that answer 5, 10, 15 years into their career, because what helping people look like when they started off as a police officer, and actually what helping people looks like when you're doing the job after 5 or 10 years is completely different. That idealistic I'm helping people isn't as Pollyannish any longer than it was. And so just reminding them of why they got into the profession, reminding them that the vast majority of our community really supports what they're doing, reminding them that when they do the job the right way, when they follow our procedural justice tenets, when they treat people with respect, when they're transparent in their motives, when they give people a voice, and then when they're fair in how they apply the law, that people by and large accept their decisions. And so when you're policing the right way, when you're going about the ideas of public safety the right way, there's really not a lot of encouragement needed because the community itself supports you.
Tell that viewer as well what the Caruth Institute is trying to do and how you fit into this process.
The Caruth Police Institute decided in early 2000, in our planning process in early 2019, that one of our primary policy areas was officer health and wellness. Texas was third in the nation in 2019 with law enforcement suicides. And if you look at it on the aggregate, so if you look at it on an average of the number of officers in each state, Texas led the country in law enforcement suicides in 2019. And there is a huge cultural difference in the way that law enforcement officers seek help for the stress and trauma of their job than what the general public does when they're seeking help, or even military veterans when they're seeking help. A law enforcement officer never gets to leave his battlefield. And so we have to begin to look at ways that we can provide health and wellness opportunities for law enforcement officers in culturally appropriate ways. But we also have to develop a way as a state with over 80,000 police officers in our state to allow them to have access to care and support for this chronic stress and trauma fatigue that they are under every day. The state has a wonderful critical incident stress management program, but not everything that affects an officer is a single critical incident. It's the chronic day-to-day stressors that they face every day on the job. And we owe it as a state to the people who are providing our public safety services to develop a way that they can access the help that they need. It's also a benefit to the community because we know that one of the leading variables to inappropriate use of force is an officer with unaddressed trauma exposure and an officer with stress fatigue. So not only are we looking to develop a way to help officers access care to better their quality of life and to ensure that we have zero law enforcement suicides in the state of Texas, but also so that our public safety systems can provide a service first community service that is staffed with healthy and well officers to the residents of every community in the state. But for the first time in over 2 decades, we're seeing law enforcement administrators step up and recognize the fact that this job is a heavy burden and that post-traumatic stress symptoms can appear in a healthy officer who can continue to do his job while receiving treatment for those services. Something that's a tremendous barrier is often when an officer admits that he's having depression, having anxiety, having symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome. His weapon will be taken. He'll be put on an administrative duty assignment while receiving care for that disorder. And that is one of the things that officers avoid more than anything else. They don't want to be the weak link or the perceived weak link in the chain.
Alex, we're hearing so much talk about defunding police departments. What's the reaction, among the, again, police chiefs about that? How are they countering this, and what are the alternatives?
Many police departments across the United States are reacting to that notion of taking away their funding, as you can imagine, in a very negative way, because and logic does suggest that if the argument is that police departments need help and that things ought to be done in a better way, why take away their funding? Logic would suggest that if they do need the help, they need more funding, right? If they need to be trained more effectively, if that argument flies, or the argument that in fact we need to have better police officers, we need to recruit better people, more competitive individuals, we need more money to do that. So it's completely the opposite of what, say, a parent would do to a child if that child needed help, right? You don't take away any kind of help that the child would want to receive or should be entitled to receive away from them. So they're discouraged. But I will tell you that many entities throughout the United States have come out to support law enforcement and, in fact, enhance the law enforcement budget. Others are saying that it was never meant to be defunded, that it was meant to be redistributed. But part of the problem is once you give the keys to the car to a politician and you tell them to go somewhere with it, at the end of the day, what's going to end up happening is they're going to take the drive, and they're going to take out pretty much everything that they want to take out based on their own perspective, when they have absolutely no earthly idea what these police officers are doing on a daily basis. So my argument is do the opposite, fund them, give them the resources that they need, and let's help them out, be a better police department, for a very, very difficult job that they perform on a daily basis.
I can't imagine why you would be somewhat skeptical of politicians spending other people's money, but you have been one of the people on the forefront of racial profiling, and that viewer, I'm sure, understands what racial profiling is, but give us just a very brief perspective of what racial profiling is, and then what you've tried to do in that area, and what you see as the, let's say, challenges if it's not done right, and the benefits if it is.
So absolutely. So in lay terms, racial profiling in policing is based on the notion that a police officer would actually engage in the enforcement of the law based on an individual's race, ethnicity, national origin, or something else other than the legal premises that the Constitution allows that officer to do. In other words, you're picking on someone because that person is of the quote unquote wrong color, wrong background, or perceived as such, right? So by virtue of that, the racial profiling statutes, as you can imagine, ever since Janet Reno was Attorney General, Bill Clinton was president, they began to sort of federalize the idea of being able to capture the essence of racism through data. And so in the state of Texas in 2001, through Senate Bill 1074, Senator West, filed a bill in the Senate, which actually passed and became the racial profiling law, which has now evolved into two different laws, more recently in 2017 through the Sandra Bland Act, which basically requires police agencies across the state to report on data specific to who the officer stopped, who they search, and what the outcome of those searches are. I have been studying data sets and have been analyzing them for 22 years. And I can tell you with some degree of authority here that at the end of the day, the data is partially accurate in the sense that it gives us some depiction of reality, but it is part of it, right? It's kind of I always make the analogy that is that the equivalent of going to a medical doctor and having that medical doctor take your temperature and say, you're about to die from cancer. Well, I would be suspicious of a diagnosis such as that if that medical doctor doesn't run other tests and other components, right? So through my lenses, you've got to look at body cam, dash cam video, look at the data, review the officer's performance, and look at what else is out there to be able to paint that picture and put it together. But it is a very complicated issue, which I think now in the next legislative session, they're going to retake and they're going to expand those data requirements and other requirements across the state.
Okay, Alex, your research and obviously the things that you guys do, BJ, at the Institute, Wall Street Journal about 3 months ago, Roland Fryer, who's probably a name known to both of you, wrote an article. He's an economist from Harvard, and he's done super research. And some of his research, unsurprisingly, has been quoted incorrectly by people trying to make one point or the other. But if I've got it right, and I'm reading almost exactly from what he wrote in the Wall Street Journal, that there is a large racial difference in police use of non-lethal force. That is a fact. And so we may not like it, but that is the actual situation. And the compliance still leads to unequal treatment. Even if we're complying with that, the treatment that someone gets, if they're black or non-black, is different. But he also said one other thing, that there doesn't appear to be any racial difference in officer-involved shootings, and that's from data all over the country. Alex, would you, are you familiar with that research, and is that something that squares with what you're seeing?
So I have to be careful to criticize a Harvard professor, for my sister is one at the medical school. She actually heads the Mass General Hospital. But I will tell you that part of the problem that some folks that don't have a background in law enforcement or really understand the criminal justice system have is that they lack context when they come up with this data, right? And what that means is that if you look at the data and it says, well, you know, you're stopping more blacks or more Hispanics than you are whites, I will be the last person in this particular interview that would say that racism doesn't exist, because it does, right? But at the end of the day is all of us want the same thing, which is how do you identify it and how do you prevent it from happening in future generations of policing? And I would submit to you that the data relevant to how force is used or whether or not it was used disproportionately on one group versus the other, I would need to see what else goes into that equation, meaning, you know, what was the reason why force was used? If you're telling me that a Caucasian police officer used force against an African American and Hispanic and a Caucasian individual in the exact same situation disproportionately, I would pay attention to that. But in policing, no two situations are the same. And so I'm very cautious when I look at those numbers. I mean, they make great headlines in great newspapers, and for us academics, it makes a great publication. But at the end of the day, you know, let's look at context. Let's look at reality, and let's begin to have that conversation then.
BJ, this is a good way for me to ask what may be our last question. You have done so much work on de-escalation, and when we look at the recent police shootings that have captured America's attention, they do seem to escalate very quickly. What are some of the methods that you are talking about with in some of your classes and in training sessions?
People find de-escalation an easy topic to talk about, but frankly, it's a very difficult topic to analyze and to teach. Again, because of what Dr. Del Carmen said, the policing situation is vastly different from the one before or the one after. And so as we look at instances where lethal force is used, we have to analyze all of the things around that particular. You can't design a de-escalation program or de-escalation instruction for, say, mental health contacts that are going to work well in the same instance where somebody is executing, say, a felony warrant on a house that has known weapons involved. And so the key point to thinking about fatal encounters with law enforcement officers, or what are the precursors to it? Not necessarily did the de-escalation fail, but did the right de-escalation fail in the right situation? So were they taught appropriate de-escalation for the situation in which they were in? Did they use it appropriately? And then did that fail at that point?
Alex, just have a minute or so left. Qualified immunity, tell that viewer what it is and what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, it's a legal principle that basically allows for government officials that are performing their duties in a discretionary manner, you know, some degree of protection from being sued if they are in fact observing the constitutional rights of other people. So in the absence of that, qualified immunity goes away. There's been a lot of talk right now about, you know, removing that from police officers. I think it's going to make the job a lot less attractive to people. We're going to have a very, very difficult time of finding eligible and willing participants at police academies in the next 5 to 10 years if we do that.
It's much harder today. The expectations are higher than they ever have been. You also have everything that you do captured on video, whether it's the video camera that you're wearing or whether it's everyone around you with their cell phones out recording what you're doing. There's so much going on in a police officer's mind. A traffic stop is the most difficult and scariest thing a police officer will do day in and day out, every day of their career, because they're walking up to a car to have an interaction with someone who they've never met. They don't know the person. They don't know the person's intent. And what they've been taught and what we train our police officers are traffic stops are incredibly dangerous. And so as that officer's approaching that car, all of that anxiety is building up. And you sitting there, not knowing what the police officer is going to do, all of that anxiety is building up in you. And so you have all of this nervous energy coming together at one moment where anything and everything is possible, but 99.9% of the time, that traffic stop ends completely peaceful, with someone having an interaction with a police officer that's very professional, and everyone goes on about their day. That's where society has really lost touch with the job that we do. We're human beings. We're tired, we're stressed, we're overworked, we're emotional, and I think our community expects us to be robots, and we're not. We're human beings with all of those emotions, all of that stress going on in our lives. We have relationship issues, we have issues with our kids, we have financial issues, and yet we're expected to be completely stoic and completely robotic in everything that we do, and we just can't.
Okay, well, as you know, as all of you know, actually, this is one of the, let's just say, major targets of some, I think, very well-meaning people to either adjust that or in some cases eliminate it as at least a hope to be part of the solution to this continuing ongoing problem. And for you, the viewer, we do a lot of programs on these type of topics, so check them at McCuistionTV.com. We always appreciate your tuning in, of course. You can follow us on Twitter. But always know that regardless of what the subject is, we are providing you perspectives that matter because we know you're the people who care.
For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email nickyn@nickymcquistion.com. Visit our website at www.mcquistiontv.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuistionTV or download McQuistion TV video podcast on iTunes.